Russia's new offensive on Ukraine's eastern Donbas region is escalating, with military forces already claiming to have hit dozens of targets there. The governor of Luhansk, the city of Kreminna, is now under Russian control. It's a strategic area for President Putin's forces, allowing them to encircle Ukrainian soldiers either by moving east or by heading south. The status of Mariupol also in question, with Russia issuing yet another ultimatum for Ukrainian troops in that port city to lay down their arms. But Ukraine is still hopeful that assault will fail, saying the invaders lack the strength to break through their defenses. Live to Ukraine and Latvia in just a moment, but first a look at what could be a brutal battle in the east.
The Battle of Donbas begins as Russia opens a new phase of its military campaign in eastern Ukraine. Explosions have been reported all along the front lines, with air sirens going off in main centers near the area. Blasts also heard in Kharkiv in the northeast, Mykolaiv in the south, and Zaporizhia in the southeast. But Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has vowed to continue to fight.
Зараз вже можна констатувати, що російські війська розпочали битву за Донбас, до якої давно готувались. Дуже значна частина всієї російської армії зараз концентрована для цього наступу. Скільки б туди не згоняли російських військових, ми будемо боротись, ми будемо захищатись, ми будемо це робити щоденно. Нічого українського не віддамо, а чужого нам просто не потрібно.
In recent weeks, the Kremlin has declared the capture of Donbas as its main goal of the war, after its attempt to storm Kyiv failed. The Ukrainian military has reported increased assaults in the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, both of which are part of the Donbas. Russia says it struck over 1,200 targets in Ukraine overnight. Dozens of these airstrikes were carried out in the east.
Ракетными войсками и артиллерией нанесены удары по 1260 военным объектам. Поражены 25 пунктов управления украинских подразделений в районах населенных пунктов Николаев, Кировск, 2 склада ракетно-артиллерийского вооружения в районах Воскресенска и Николаева, 2 зенитные ракетные пусковые установки Бук-М1 в районах Гуляйполя и Николаевка-2, а также 1214 мест сосредоточения живой силы противника.
At the same time, a new ultimatum for Ukrainian defenders of the besieged port city of Mariupol. Moscow has called on Ukraine to surrender the Azovstal steel plant by midday. Ukrainian troops are believed to be still holding up there. At least 1,000 civilians are also said to be hiding in shelters beneath the steel plant. Officials have urged people in the east, including Mariupol, to flee to the west in anticipation of intensified Russian assault. But Ukraine has been unable to secure an agreement for free passage of civilians for the 3rd consecutive day.
And Philip Crowther joins us live from Lviv. Philip, now you're in the west. What's the situation like on the ground in the east?
Well, this is believed to be the beginning of a massive onslaught, only the beginning at this point. The Russian military says that it has used all sorts of weaponry in that Donbas region already. Air-launched missiles, for example, artillery strikes have increased as well. Russia says that some of those missiles, for example, were heading towards Kharkiv, the city in the northeast, but also, and very importantly, the cities of Dnipro and Zaporizhia. Those are outside of the Donbas area. And that gives you an indication as to how much of that territory Russia wants to control. It is a stated goal from Moscow that it wants to control the whole of that Donbas area. Now, the governor of Luhansk, and that is one of the 2 regions that make up the Donbas region, he says that the town of Kreminna is one of those places where essentially a front line was able to be pierced by the Russian army, and that would appear to bring the Russian army a little bit closer to one of its goals on the ground, which would be to encircle Ukrainian troops that are already there in that Donbas region.
Philip, as you say, this is only the beginning. Ukraine and Russia entering this new phase of the war with lessons learned in the first 54 days. How will Ukrainian forces fare this time around?
Well, they should know that terrain pretty well because of what has happened there over the last 8 years. But it is a very, very different terrain. That's the first thing to know. It is a lot flatter, less urban, and that should make troop movements for the Russian army, if indeed they advance, a little bit easier. Both Russia and Ukraine are stating pretty clearly that this is a new phase of the war. The government of Russia has made it very clear that its goal is the capture of the whole of the Donbas area. And that's where we have to look back at what has happened there over the last 8 years, because Ukraine has been at war with Russian-backed separatists in that Donbas area for 8 years. There has been a front line, essentially, a line of contact, as it is officially called, established between the area where there are pro-Russian separatists already that have held part of that area for 8 years, and the part where the Ukrainian army has also been active for 8 years now. Now, in that same area, there was the creation, so to say, of so-called independent republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. They then were recognized by Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, and he now says that he wants to defend those two self-proclaimed republics. And that would explain why Russia wants to control the whole of the Donbas area. Now, essentially, that front line that I mentioned, that line of contact, it's a boomerang-shaped front line that goes from the northeast in the Donbas region down to the southeast, and it's a very long one, 480 kilometers. So what does Russia want from this? Well, Vladimir Putin wants to be able to announce some kind of a victory, and having control over that Donbas region would be one way for him to do so after what, first of all, were a significant military defeat in the outskirts of Kiev, significant casualties as well. And he also comes into this new phase of the war with some serious economic troubles back home. Those are some of the reasons why Russia is now entering this new phase of the war.
Well, thanks for that. Philip Crowther speaking to us there from Lviv.
And now let's get to Laura Makinishwood. She's joining us live from Riga, that's in Latvia. Laura, both sides here, they're appearing to dig their heels in over control of the port city of Mariupol. I mean, Ukrainian forces essentially ignoring the Russian demand to surrender. What's your assessment of Russia's resolve here to capture Mariupol?
Well, yes, and Russia had made that ultimatum, a second one after a failed attempt over the weekend to try to get Ukrainian defence forces to surrender, to leave Mariupol. They've now offered a 2-hour window for those defence forces troops that are in that metal plant, that steelworks in the city of Mariupol, to put down their arms and to leave. If they do that, Russian troops say that their lives will be protected. But that then begs the question, doesn't it, as to what might happen to them if they decide to stay. We know that President Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has been pushing to say that his troops will stay there until the very end. They will continue to fight for Mariupol because they do not want to give up any territory to Russia. On the flip side, Russia saying, of course, that it will need to take this land because it needs to have some sort of victory there after what is now a 7-week struggle for that city. There have been claims made by representatives, pro-Russian representatives, from that new independently claimed area of Donetsk, as Philip just explained, saying that reports that civilians are also in that steelworks are actually being made up by Ukrainian forces, by the Ukrainian government. Of course, Ukraine will say that that indeed is true, that actually there are civilians being protected there, hidden in those underground passageways beneath that steelworks plant. Russia has already said it is sending in special forces units to try to access some of the territory around it. And there are concerns as well that bombs may be used on it. Pretty heavy bombs in terms of weight, some that may be designed to try to get to people that are buried beneath the ground. So a lot of threats coming from Russia. It feels as though they really do want to push after such a long battle to take Mariupol. But the question is, how long can Ukrainian defence forces remain there and hold tight, essentially?
Plenty of threats from Moscow, Laura, but also lots of accusations towards the West for prolonging this ongoing conflict. I mean, this is military aid coming from the West that the Ukrainian forces and the troops there, they desperately need that aid. But at this point, is the sustained delivery of all that weaponry, all those supplies, the main thing standing in the way of a Russian victory in Ukraine?
Well, it's those supplies and also the steel, I suppose, of the Ukrainian defence forces. Those troops that are in the eastern region at the moment are called some of the hardened fighters within the Ukrainian army, within the military. But they do need those weapons, of course, to be supplied by the West to them, because they have said multiple times that they are running out of ammunition, running out of supplies. Now, we've seen the first lot of shipments arriving from that second package of support from the United States, an $800 million package coming to the border of Ukraine, starting to be moved across the country to those areas that need it. But there is going to be another discussion today between G7, NATO and EU leaders about what more may be done. US President Joe Biden has called for this meeting. It will involve many leaders, many representatives from a lot of countries across Europe and the wider G7 group. So it may be that later on we hear a bit more from that about what extra support can be offered. The UK has already confirmed that it will offer up armoured vehicles that are capable of firing missiles that will target helicopters and planes. That has already been confirmed by the United Kingdom. The question is now how much more can be offered, because President Zelensky firmly believes that with that extra armour, then they can at least hold back the Russian troops.
Laura, thank you for that. Laura Macon Isherwood in Riga, Latvia.